Hey guys, so I woke up this morning with a strong desire to define art, or at least what I feel argue as to what people are really answering when they're asked the question, "What is art?" And I wrote for like 7 hours or something, and had another conversation with my friend Brandon, who I'd mentioned earlier, and I have decided that since I have been missing out posting videos, I'm going to post one where I'm just going to read what I wrote. Um, and it's really long and very abstract thought, so if this isn't your cup of tea, you should not watch the rest of this video. I'm also kind of sick because I was sick and then I went out drinking really hardcore last night, so my voice is going to be really like raspy and stuff, so forgive me. But yeah, here I go. I'm going to read it. Alright, what is art? This question is asked all too often, and people always give a large variety of loaded answers with all sorts of symbolic, figurative, and otherwise deep meanings. But I really don't feel that it is all too hard to define. What's harder to define is the answer to the question people actually answer when asked to define the word. They actually describe a concept rather than define a word. What they usually try to answer is this: what is the purpose of art? A side note, which is kind of funny, right when I posted this, I put a link to it on my Facebook page, and someone obviously just read the title and without reading my essay answered, and they did exactly that. They answered, "What is the purpose of art?" Which is precisely what I was trying to argue. Um, First, I should start with... Really? He's really like whistling. Hold on, I gotta go see what the hell's going on here. That was incredibly annoying. Anyway, okay, first I should start with my pretty basic and relatively complete definition of what art is, as I can't really preface an argument towards art's purpose predicated on an understood definition without giving said definition. Note as well that I will ignore the debate of art versus art with a capital A, choosing to use the former throughout this writing and ignoring its inclination towards craftsmanship and the technical aspects of the practice in exchange for ease of understanding. My definition is such: art is an object or idea that exists in the universe, has been created, and is accepted by one or more persons as art. This definition is based on the limit of human understanding. There could surely be an art piece that is accepted as art by an entity other than mankind, which would therefore make it art in all likelihood, but as far as we know, humans are the only creatures capable of abstract thought. There could also exist something that has not been created and simply is, but again, this is something that we are not capable of conceiving. An idea existing necessitates its creation, however, so even the thought of an object which does not physically exist can be accepted as art and thus exist as such, even without the object ever actually being created in the real world. My definition also assumes that the art must be in our universe, not Earth. Surely there can be art in outer space, again based on the limit of human understanding and our concept of existence. The last point I will bring up in my definition is the word "is", particularly its second use. My definition has its weakest point in this word. Something accepted as art by a single person makes it art. Since there is someone who believes it to be art, there is at least one perception, one reality, making it so. It is defined as art in one reality. If it is defined as art in one reality, it is definable as art, correct? But what if that person dies, and no one after him ever accepts this thing as art? Is it art still? It was art at one point, but is it technically, by my definition at least, not art anymore? When all is said and done and time no longer exists, if that should happen, and some entity, let's call him the Great Definer, looks back at everything that has ever existed, defining all of those things and describing their qualities, will they call that thing art? What if it existed as art for most of its existence, but not all of it, like Duchamp's urinal? If Duchamp's fountain, his urinal, existed for exactly 200 years, and then someone destroyed it, essentially forcing that object into having existed for 199 years and some days as art, but the remainder of that time, the time previous to him declaring it a ready-made, it existed as a non-art object, ignoring the subsequent documented record of its having existed in art books, thereby ignoring the concept of the urinal as art. The concept and the object would be qualified differently in the great art judgment. Then what? Would the great definer say that this thing was mostly art, but not entirely? And would that mean that he calls it art by way of a consensus of time, essentially weighing every moment of its existence as a yes art moment versus a no art moment, choosing the victor through some grandiose scale? What if everyone dies 80 billion years before time ends, and all of the paintings and sculptures from the Italian Renaissance are somehow conserved, lasting until the very last moments of this universe's being? Since there's no way to qualify these objects as art, despite their labels, which no one is there to understand anyway, save for the great definer, who doesn't count in my definition, would they be later qualified as art? Surely they were not art for most of their existence, billions of years as opposed to a few hundred in fact. So by my definition, the great definer would be forced into defining these objects, and by that logic all art objects that exist much longer than humans, as non-art objects, correct? What about art objects or concepts that are forgotten? This gets especially confusing when you think of an art concept that is thought up and then forgotten. Does it even exist anymore? I wonder how many art ideas I would appreciate as art that I have simply never heard. I bet there are trillions. I have relatively good answers for some of these questions that strengthen my argument for art's definition, but this is not a time or a place that I wish to place them. This definition also brings up a lovely aspect that abstract concepts like art share, that of subjectivity. To keep this short, I will say that perception can surely define reality, as all abstract concepts like love, religion, and art prove day after day, and that something that exists as art in my reality, a Jackson Pollock painting for example, can exist in another's as non-art. But I would argue that since this object exists in only... Okay, let me start that sentence over. But I would argue that since this object exists in one reality as art, it is therefore definable as art, at least in one case, and therefore art. There are a lot of holes in that logic, but again, this is not a place or time to argue for it. So what I have finally arrived at is this douchebag with his freaking megaphone. Alright, I'm going to keep going. So what I have finally arrived at, if by a great leap from the last paragraph to this one, is what I believe to be the purpose of art. I warn you now that this will be an argument far, far weaker than that of my definition. I would answer the loaded question of what is art, loaded with the question what is art's purpose, of course, as something that inspires. If I can see something by which I am inspired, I can do a pretty good job of accepting that thing as art. Luckily enough for me, I can be inspired by literally every single thing I see, and thus accept everything as art. That would surely drive many artists and art critics mad, but again, subjectivity is a beautiful thing, and thus the world and all of its art has become a beautiful thing to me. This also means that I accept a higher power as an art creator, having created everything not man-made in order for me to accept it as art, but again, this is another debate. Should one argue with me that art can exist not to inspire, I would point back first to my definition, which allows me to argue that anyone who has accepted something as art has been inspired to do so, and then ask what is its purpose if not the one I have given it. It seems to me that even if art's purpose is solely to convey a message, it is only through inspiration that the message is conveyed. In that case, one may not understand the message, or he may misinterpret it, which surely happens more often than a clear understanding. But in either case, an inspiration sparked through thought and the inspiration sparked that thought and the reception of the message derived. That is, if I paint a silhouette of Mickey Mouse on a sculpture of one of the round black bombs from Looney Tunes, think of the Hundreds logo, and my message is one of Disney's foreboding shadow encapsulating all other cartoons, instigating its impending demise, or whatever, I may be the only person in the world to understand that message, should I never explain said message. A million other messages could be conveyed in my imagery alone, and surely a million other messages would be received by my audiences. Art surely has the ability to speak on its own, and has done so for centuries, but its only vessel is inspiration. If my audience was not inspired, even in the slightest way, to come up with a message that they think the art is trying to convey, then they cannot accept it as art. Even if it is not my message. Further, even if there was no message placed into the object at all by the artist. Art for art's sake is a concept that many critics and artists have hailed as all-powerful for the last 100 years or so. Surely this art is not meant to convey a message, right? It exists for precisely the opposite reason. But the only way we can accept that reason is to be inspired by its reasoning, for lack of a better word. Mondrian painted grids of color largely because he wanted to destroy the concepts of ground, field, and representation. He spent a lifetime doing this and could have spent many hundreds of lifetimes, indeed probably in infinity. Miraut's goal was was often to assassinate painting by destroying what painting was. At times throughout his career, he wanted to rid visual art of all of its qualities and make art that is definable only as art, and had no further message. At least this was one of his many outlandish goals. Surely one can be inspired by art in itself. You can see a painting that you like, not know why you like it, but accept it therefore as art and enjoy it as such forevermore. But one can also be inspired by Murau's goal to rid painted artworks of definition, not enjoy his work in the slightest, and accept it as art only by means of its message, something Murau would likely qualify as a sin, which ironically was one he was committing time and time again throughout his career. If this happens, you would have been inspired by the piece to accept it as art, and there is little way around that, in my humble undergrad art history student opinion. I've spent far too much time running around weak arguments with the goal to finish up this writing and get to my responsibilities as an artist, those of painting and conveying messages of commentary on commercial art in my case, and must leave this to a later debate, but I hope I have inspired an inkling in whoever reads this to consider what they are answering when they are asked, what is art? And that was my morning, and it was probably a wasted morning. But at any rate, you guys have sent me a lot of emails and messages that I get to, and I need to go punch that guy with the megaphone in his freaking mouth. And I'm totally kidding. I'm not actually upset at him. Maybe a little bit.